Two big questions on the table going into the Qatar weekend. Penultimate round of the World Championship were, one, will McLaren be where they've been all year, which is really competitive, right at the front? Answer, yes. And will the Red Bull, that pesky Red Bull RB21, be having a good weekend or a difficult weekend for Max Verstappen? It's been up and down all year. Well, the answer is, at the moment, Friday and going into sprint qualifying, which we had on Friday evening in Qatar, the Red Bull does not look very good. Max complaining like crazy of the car bouncing more than any other driver that I heard on the radio. Couldn't see much in terms of external camera shots, but Max really, really annoyed with the amount of bouncing he had. He talked about it in the one and only free practice session. And then it became worse, it appears, during the qualifying session. So much so that when he got onto the soft tyres and did his first push run, it was going to be push, too slow, and then push, two push laps on the soft tyres in Q3. On that lap, turn 4, Max just ran out of road and had to abort the lap. So that lap was gone. Then they went through the 2 slow lap process. So he just had 1 lap to do it, and he probably had floor damage as well, as a result of which Max qualified only 6th for the sprint. Beaten, would you believe, by Yuki Tsunoda, basically at the same time as Max, but slightly quicker. And yes, he'll be able to take this back to Japan over the winter, that he out-qualified Max Verstappen for the sprint race. We'll see what happens on Saturday, of course. But once that bouncing had happened, there is absolutely nothing, of course, that you can do because the cars are in Parc Ferme. And Max was graphically describing the problem at the end of Q2 when they were still running the medium tyres, around the medium in SQ1, SQ2. And particularly at turn 7, where they were saying the car looks pretty much on the nose, pretty pointy. And Max saying, not much I can do because I've got understeer and I've got mid-corner dramas as well with the bouncing. And they said, well, it's over-rotating at the rear. They gave him a different torque setting, but that's what it was like. It was just like lots going on and no result, of course, at the end of all that. And all of that, I think, just a function of the amount of bouncing he's got bouncing into most of the corners makes it very, very difficult to judge and balance the car. All credit to Yuki Tsunoda. I presume his car's got a lot of bouncing as well. But he didn't make any mistakes this time, or really big mistakes anyway, and got the lap in, so good for him. He was quick, actually, from the start of free practice as well. But getting back to the front, Oscar Piastri had his moments too. Turn 4 on the soft tyres right at the end. The car jiggled, but he just held it and stayed with the lap and just got the pole. At that point, George Russell was quickest for Mercedes. In the live stream a couple of days ago, a viewer kindly asked me who I thought was going to win in Qatar, and I said, well, head says George Russell, only because it kind of feels like a George Russell moment, and it's a sort of circuit where George does really well. Lots of scrappy racing, lots of sort of runoff area from which you can sort of recover, and we know how aggressive he is anyway. A lot of people thought that the Mercedes wouldn't be very good there because there are so many medium high-speed corners, but of course I think the reality of this Qatar circuit, and I'd kind of forgotten how soulless it is and how similar all the corners are. I mean, it's just got no character at all as far as I can tell. And I think in the case of Lando Norris, it looked like he sort of, A, wasn't too fired up about it. B, he's not that worried about whether Oscar now beats him because all he's got to do is just score points and he's going to be world champion. Good for him. And C, it kind of looked as if he didn't know where he was on the lap anyway. Had a track limits drama, ran wide a couple of times. But Oscar sort of kept it on the straight and narrow and just got the pole. So it's good for him. There'll be a bit of a race. But, I say a bit of a race. I can't imagine Lando's going to take any sort of race to Oscar tomorrow, or George for that matter. He's going to cruise around and get points. George might well take the race to Oscar. And of course, come the Grand Prix, qualifying in the Grand Prix, that's when this limitation of 25 laps per set of Pirelli tyres will have effect. In terms of the sprint race, 19 laps, a little bit short of the limit. It'll be a very good tester. Interesting to see a few teams running the hard tyre for 25 laps in the free practice session this morning. The fuel runs again showed how good McLaren are. Ferrari also in trouble around Qatar. Too many difficult, long, medium, fast corners for that Ferrari chassis. Charles Leclerc looking as edgy. Well, Lando looked messy, Charles Leclerc looked edgy and had lots of edgy moments. Lewis Hamilton did not make it out of Q1, SQ1 yet again. And I think it's a function of Lewis's year now that it kind of passed without too much comment. Lewis, in the brief interview he did afterwards, very cynical in his replies, with a smile on his face, obviously as a result of the whole John Elkann thing about don't talk, the drivers are talking too much, just refusing to talk about anything to do with the car and referring the interviewee to the prospect of it being a nice circuit in terms of the weather, and that was about it. But the reality was it was another messy session for Lewis Hamilton. I was amazed in something like SQ1. I mean, in the race this could happen if you're talking about tyre management or maybe fuel or something like that. But I was amazed in SQ1 that going into his last lap when he was on the bubble, I mean, he wasn't even on the bubble. It was he needed to put in a quick time to get into the top 15, to get out of the last 5. His engineer said, Lewis, take turn 17 in 6th. And I had to look back at it, and he'd been taking it in 7th. In classic Lewis Hamilton style, if you're on the edge, always go for the longer gear, have the car a bit calmer. And I think that looked good. I mean, that's what you'd expect of Lewis Hamilton. If it's a Charles Leclerc, edgy, high rev, energizing the car, 6th gear kink, you'd expect a Lewis Hamilton to get 7th just beforehand. That's how Lewis has always driven. And he said, no, Lewis, take it in 6th. And I was watching and looking at the speeds. I mean, he took it in 6th, and he was something like 8 kilometres an hour slower than Charles going through there on his so-called quickest lap. Well, it was his quickest lap, but it wasn't a quick lap. It wasn't quick enough to get him in. And I don't know what context that is absurd to me. In the context of the engineer telling the 7 times world champion what gear to use for a corner, or doing it anyway in SQ1, for what reason? I don't know. I mean, just complete and utter lack of communication, lack of understanding, lack of harmony, lack of feel. And again, to come back to all the comments I made about Lewis going to Ferrari, when trying to look on the bright side, I always said, but at least he's got Freddie Vasseur there, who knows him, he knows the way he drives, he knows what sort of gears he would like for any given corner, the way Lewis likes things to be slightly longer and calmer in terms of gear ratios. But Freddie Vasseur obviously isn't doing anything about that. And no wonder Lewis felt completely deflated afterwards. I'm not saying you can blame the engineer there for telling him to use a gear that Lewis didn't feel comfortable with or didn't result in a lap time that worked. That's not the point. The point is that they were even doing that in the first place. That is the point. And that is a sign of a much deeper problem. And it's just very sad to see Lewis Hamilton being shrugged off now as not making it out of Q1. I mean, it's just ridiculous, isn't it? In a Ferrari, absolutely ridiculous. Having said that, Charles Leclerc wasn't quick today. Lewis was 0.4 slower than Charles. I mean, one of the amazing things for me was Lance Stroll not getting out of Q1 because Fernando Alonso was really quick. Stroll was 0.6 slower than Fernando Alonso in Q1. And it wasn't a good day either for Racing Bulls. I thought they would be quick, but they weren't. I mean, you'd imagine this would be a really good circuit for Liam Lawson, because in the same way that Max cannot impart anything into a Red Bull, or very little into a Red Bull, that Yuki Tsunoda couldn't do, you would imagine that Liam Lawson would be right up there with Isaac Hadjar, but he wasn't, and he was half a second slower than Isaac in SQ1 as well. So just going through the grid for the sprint race, Oscar Piastri on the pole for McLaren, 20.0, very good lap. Lando Norris, P3, 20.2. So Oscar, I think that's more Lando just not getting in a clean lap. George Russell, 20.0 as well, beaten by 0.03 of a second. P2 for Mercedes, good result for him. Kimi Antonelli, P7 in the other Mercedes. Fernando Alonso, P4, really good in the week that it was announced. Shortly after we were saying in the live stream that really Adrian Newey should not be anything other than a team principal these days, and he's been a team principal really at Red Bull for quite a long time, and anybody that wants to outshout Adrian in any team these days is quickly going to get stamped underfoot. In the week that we had that, Fernando Alonso P4 for Aston Martin and Adrian on the pit wall. So good result for him. As I say, ridiculously poor result for Lance Stroll. Yuki Tsunoda P5 ahead of M Verstappen. Wow. Yeah, okay. First time that's happened, but good on him. Kimi Antonelli 7th, as I say. Carlos Sainz and Alex Albon in the two Williams-Mercedes made it through to the top 10. Carlos was 8th. Alex 10th, and they were sandwiching Charles Leclerc in the very unwieldy, edgy, difficult Ferrari. Others not to make it through the two Haas Ferraris. That was a bit of a surprise for me, but Oliver Behrman and Esteban Ocon did well to get out of Q1, comfortably out of Q1. And the two Sauber Ferraris did very well too, I thought, to get into Q2 comfortably. Gabriele Bortoleto and Nico Hülkenberg both having track limits and running wide dramas right on the edge, but nonetheless doing a good job to get out of Q1. Unlike, of course, as we say, Sir Lewis Hamilton. What a shame that was. Anyway, that's the sprint race, and we'll see tomorrow how it goes. I probably sound a bit flat. It's because the whole thing's a bit flat, isn't it? It's not going to be a championship finale that I think a lot of people were trying to tease it up to be. And it's on a pretty, as I say, the only word that comes to mind is soulless. Adjective that comes to mind is soulless circuit, with all these corners that are basically the same. I'm sure it's a great track for MotoGP. What are Formula One cars doing there? That's the question. But anyway, it will be a scrappy sprint race, probably between Oscar and George. Oscar, it'll be interesting from Oscar's point of view, because he does need to obviously get a result if he can and win the race and just try and do something with the points gap to Lando. So he'll want to make sure he doesn't hit anything and finishes above all. But equally, he'll want to win this race and beat George Russell. And George will be thinking, well, Oscar will be a bit conservative because of points, and I shouldn't have any trouble with Lando, and Max is way behind me. Here's a big chance to win. So that could be an interesting little cameo, I guess. And Fernando Alonso in there. Yeah, he needs a good race, doesn't he? He's had a couple of good qualifying sessions. It'd be great to see Fernando have a good race tomorrow in the sprint, and I'm sure he will. And will Yuki Tsunoda beat Max Verstappen to the line at Red Bull? I mean, if anything, this performance today by Red Bull kind of sums up why Lando appears to be just walking very relaxed way, give or take a few track limits dramas and running wide here towards the World Championship. Because it's just been such an up and down year for Red Bull. I mean, 1 minute they're out there really quick, and the next minute they're struggling in Mexico, struggling throughout practice and qualifying in Brazil. Then they have a great race in Brazil, a pretty good race anyway, or very good race. And then they come here, and no reason really why the car should be bouncing and terrible. This is a Red Bull development that's, of a great car that we've had in this whole era of this formula. And it's terrible. It's all over the place. Max can barely drive the thing, as he said. So, I mean, that's no wonder. I mean, this is a little cameo of the year, actually, that is just passed behind us, I think, isn't it? Anyway, back tomorrow with a report on how that sprint race goes, and obviously how qualifying goes for the Grand Prix proper. So we'll see then. Big thanks to Jetcraft, to OEM Exclusive, to Track Ninja, and to REC Watches for their support of this channel. And of course, to you, the viewer, for watching. See you tomorrow. Was McLaren right on top in qualifying, as you would expect. Just a flashback to the sprint race today. Very boring, and it was too. Effectively, it was just a test session, I think, for most, to make up for the lack of running on Friday that you get when it's a sprint weekend. Oscar Piastri won the race easily from George Russell, Lando Norris, Max Verstappen in fourth place. For a while, Max was pushing Lando reasonably hard in the early laps. I think that was more Lando just taking it very easy and inducing Max into using his tyres as much as possible. And thereafter, everybody cruised. Right at the end of the race, a few of the rabbits at the back put on soft tyres, I guess just to get a feel for the soft going into qualifying later in the evening. And I thought it was quite interesting that on his second last lap, Oscar Piastri almost matched the time set by, for example, a Pierre Gasly on a new set of softs. And at this point, of course, his mediums, his used mediums, his started on used mediums, most of them were pretty much at the end of their life. And Oscar just pulled out 0.8 of a second. That just showed how much margin McLaren had. And they took that into qualifying. Lando took a little bit of time to get up to speed, as you would expect. He's got a mentality, I think, this weekend of, if it is again going to be an Oscar weekend, and there was no reason to think that on a circuit like this, all about high-speed commitment, that Oscar wouldn't be right there. Lando, I think this weekend, very happy just to finish behind Oscar, if that's what happens. Push him a little bit, maybe, when it comes to strategy at the end of the 25-lap runs, things like that. But there's not a lot of cards with which to play. And if Lando has to finish second tomorrow to Oscar Piastri, I don't think that'll be a big disaster for him. And from McLaren's point of view, to go into the last race with Lando still having a healthy lead, but still potentially able to lose it to Oscar, I think McLaren will feel they've done their job then, and the cards will fall where they may, and there'll be no recriminations at all, I think, if Oscar does win this. And I don't think there'll be any orders or anything like that. I'm sure there won't be any orders. It'll just be a straight race, apart from the reality of the first corner, where anything can happen, of course, and Max Verstappen still mathematically in it. So let's have a look at those laps. Oscar Piastri, very, very good. And it was about high-speed commitment. And at one point, Will Joseph, Lando's engineer, did say, you've seen the overlays, Lando. It is about high-speed commitment. And Lando thereafter did a very, very good lap. He didn't do a good second lap in Q3. He understeered a little bit wide of the turn-in point going into turn 2. Of all places, not a particularly dramatic corner. Ran wide and then aborted that lap. And that was the lap in which Oscar then retook the pole position, which Lando had got on his first run. And I think the track was a little bit quicker there. We shouldn't read too much into it. Although fastest in Sector 1, right at the end, was indeed Max Verstappen. We'll get on to Max in a second. So Lando in the pits when Oscar went past the checkered flag to take the pole, and McLaren will start 1-2, a perfect situation for them on a circuit in which they appear to be completely and utterly dominant. P3, Max Verstappen, very good P3, given where he was in the sprint, complaining still about massive bouncing in the car. They managed to get that out, it appears, by and large, for qualifying. Not necessarily by reducing the ride height. They might have done that. Very difficult to know. They might have reduced, for example, the heave stiffness on the car. Difficult to say. But Max not complaining anymore about bouncing, complaining more at the beginning of qualifying, going into Q2 indeed, about the effect of downshifts on the way the car was moving under braking, something he said he'd never really felt before, and obviously quite a lot of work going on there. Effectively, Red Bull, having got rid of the bouncing, starting to set the car up in the middle of Q2. That shows where Red Bull were, and of course, as it went on, Max got quicker and quicker. I'm not sure there was a lot more in the car than we saw from Max, but a very good lap, but indicative of the way Red Bull have to be so careful with their tyres is that Max and George Russell too were doing preparation laps out of the pits before they did the first quick lap, whereas McLaren able to go out of the pits and then effectively the first flying lap is their first push lap. That just shows how much work Red Bull have to do to get the tyres absolutely into the window. Going back to the McLarens, another interesting message from Will Joseph to Lando was when he was trying to get him up to speed compared with Oscar, looking at the overlays. He said, and let's get rid of that coasting going into the last corner, Lando. Just be a little bit more aggressive with the throttle, or use the throttle more, activate the throttle more. I think he said something like that, which was a reference to something that I've often talked about with Lando and how good that is, I think, as part of Lando's repertoire, which is this ability to brake and then not to be touching the brake or the throttle for a millisecond or two, maybe up to a second. I doubt it's a second on some of these demanding corners, which do require a lot of commitment and finesse. And that's Lando just letting the car settle, letting the tyres feel the surface of the road, and then he's feeling that. And he does that incredibly well. And I was looking at all the traces, and I'm pleased to report that Lando didn't seem to respond to that, because he was doing exactly the same after the Will Joseph message as he was before, from the telemetry that I can see going into that last corner. But here's the interesting thing. Both Max and Oscar were also doing exactly what Lando does into turn 17. They're also letting the car float. So I think Lando does that very naturally, and Max doesn't do it as much, and Oscar certainly doesn't do it as much, but certainly through 17, they all look like Lando clones going through there. I mean, it was a little bit unsettling to hear GP talking to Max about minimum speed and turn in a bit later here and do this, all these sort of minute instructions. It's no surprise in a way, because the car is still very, very difficult. It's also that sort of circuit where it's a very sort of telemetry driven digital circuit where finesse and touch doesn't actually add up to very much. And I think that's a characteristic of this circuit. I think it kind of reduces to a lower, not the lowest, but a lower common denominator, the skills involved by the drivers. And it just shows how expansive I think that Max's mind is, that he can respond to all that. And this is the ultimate feel and touch driver, being driven by telemetry and numbers going around the lap, and still obviously relying on quite a lot of touch to do it. And but they can get so much information on a lap like this, on a circuit like this, on the pit wall, that the drivers just have to work within that, unless you're Lando Norris being told not to coast as much going through 17. So, yeah, I mean, Max, interestingly, it took him 2 corners to get past Yuki in the sprint race. You recall that he was out-qualified by Yuki yesterday by a couple of thousandths. And Yuki duly did a good job he was on the outside, and Max sort of went down the inside, but then Yuki sort of went round his outside on the first corner. You thought, oh, that's quite brave of Yuki. And they hit to turn 2, and Yuki sort of runs wide, and Max does a undercut, and there he is straight up inside him going into turn 3. So very impressive opening half lap by Max. Fernando Alonso made a terrible start in the sprint race as well, finished, struggling. And Lewis Hamilton, just while we're on the sprint, he started at the back, as you know, and indeed they changed the setup of the car, so he started from the pit lane. But he couldn't do anything about Lance Stroll. He was behind Lance Stroll, and it was a DRS train, but he couldn't do anything about Lance Stroll. What does that tell you? And then let's get on to Ferrari in qualifying, because Charles Leclerc just made it through to Q3, had to use all his new sets of softs to do it, had no new sets left for the final part of qualifying. I mean, what does that tell you, first of all, about Ferrari? He also had a massive lose in Q3 as well, presumably because he was on these used softs trying to wring everything he could out of them. And it was a really vicious lose. He went wide over a curb. I don't know what corner it was. They all look the same, don't they? But then it was a sort of snap over correction and flick back the other way. And you just, my immediate thought was, wow, it's so good that we have all this runoff area. Imagine if Charles had that moment on a circuit with any sort of barrier anywhere near it. That was a really high speed, very, very vicious spin. And Charles eventually qualified 10th, as he would, on the scrub softs in a very, very bad Ferrari. It's all you can say. And yet again, Lewis Hamilton did not get out of Q1. He was actually a little bit quicker than Charles on his first run in Q1. And you thought, oh, well, this may be okay for Lewis. Maybe he'll get into Q2. But then they went out on their new softs at the end of Q1. And Lewis didn't go any quicker, did exactly the same time. Charles found 3/10, as he does. And Lewis, had a bit of traffic, but then traffic isn't that much of an issue these days. There's so much. Well, I say that. There was a bit of a GPS issue today. So maybe in fairness to Lewis, maybe the traffic did slow him, because he was quite good in Sector 1, but when he got the traffic, he lost 2 or 3/10. And that was enough for him not to make it out of Q1. So, okay, jury's out. Maybe the GPS, maybe the traffic was terrible. It looks like he's in a mode now of saying, well, I'm not allowed to say anything. So I'll say that for him. For all Lewis fans out there, there was a little bit of saving grace, not much. Anyway, didn't make it out of Q1 again. Just terrible. And Lance Stroll didn't make it out of Q1 again. And this time he was saying, instead of yesterday when he was saying, oh, didn't get traffic, didn't get the tyres up, he just said, I can't go any quicker. I cannot go any quicker. I don't know what's the problem. And so my thought to that was, and this in many ways could be the sort of central theme of this Grand Prix weekend, is Adrian Newey in his first race, new role as team principal, there on the pit wall. I think he's actually wearing Aston Martin kit as well. And imagine Fernando Alonso makes it through to Q3, and Lance Stroll, the son of the man who basically owns the team, who without whom the team wouldn't even exist, whose one goal in life now is to have his son win a Grand Prix, and if he can win a Grand Prix, win a World Championship, that's, I'm sure, what he's still thinking. Adrian Newey, welcome to the land of explanations, when you have to say to Lawrence Stroll what the problem is with his son Lance and why he's only in Q1 and Fernando gets through to Q3. I'd be interested to see that one. I don't think Adrian will be saying very much other than grunting a little bit and moving on. That'd be my opinion. But then again, it is the owner of the team. So, there's got to be a little bit of an issue going on there. So welcome to the big time, Adrian, is all I can say. So let's just have a look at the grid. So let's look at the grid otherwise. George Russell looked pretty good. I was a bit surprised right at the end. He was out right at the end of Q3, timed it perfectly from Mercedes track being quick point of view. Only did the same time as Max, a 19.6, which compared with Oscar's 19.3, it was quite a big gap. I was surprised by that. And also it does indicate, obviously, they do have some tyre issues still, because they too were doing a prep lap. Except, of course, right at the end of Q3, because when Charles went off, there was lots of debris all over the circuit, barge boards and stuff, and the red came out, which meant that for that final run, there was only 5 minutes. There was no time to do a prep lap, and the brakes were cold, and it was difficult. Max did the time, but he did it as part of the rising graph of the setup on the Red Bull, which had really only started at the beginning of qualifying. Whereas I think not having that prep lap hurt Mercedes and George Russell more. George was complaining again about weird steering, which is obviously something that he talked a lot about on the radio in Vegas, and the inconsistency of the stiffness of the steering, the feel of the steering, and he was talking about it again. Kimi Antonelli had a time deleted, but then got back, did a very good job, just slower than George. Isaac Hadjar, fabulous job in the Racing Bulls. Only team actually to bring any sort of upgrade to this circuit. Call it an upgrade. I call it good old Dan Gurney. It's just Gurney flaps on the front flaps. And that is named after Dan Gurney, for those that don't know. And there is a story behind that. And on this channel, actually, I've got an interview with Dan when he describes the discovery of the Gurney flap. So if you search through my YouTube channel, you will come to that point. Fernando 20.5, Carlos Sainz 20.7, another good job. Few dramas with a so-called unsafe pit release. Pierre Gasly into Q3 with an Alpine Renault. Lewis Hamilton in a Ferrari, not out of Q1. Whoa. And then Charles Leclerc, P10 in the other Ferrari. Not happy at all, as you can imagine. So, yeah, I think this race will be, looks like it'll be an Oscar walkover, assuming there are no glitches with pit stops. And this whole 25-lap thing means that Oscar can go pretty hard on the tyres and not have to worry about them too much. So it looks like it's a pretty straightforward race for him. I don't think Lando will be upset at all to be finishing second, but he needs to finish second, obviously, just to be, just to make sure that everyone knows who's boss as they go into Abu Dhabi. And, Max against George, be an interesting race. So, yeah, there we are. Look forward to that tomorrow. Don't forget to have a look in the description below this video at the latest watches from REC. They specialize, wonderful small Danish company. They specialize in DNA from interesting racing cars and road cars and putting that DNA. It might be, in the case of the Ayrton Senna Lotus 98T Renault, it's the aluminium from the plenum chambers that were actually on the car, on the engine. And it can be brakes, it can be any aspect of the car. And the two watches that are currently being designed and built, one is around the Ford Mustang used by Steve McQueen in the amazing movie Bullet. And of course the other car is the Datsun 240Z, Z as it was probably called in the United States, when it was dominating production racing in the early 70s in the hands of John Morton, preparation by Peter Brock. Both of those guys, Carroll Shelby disciples. And what a car that was. That transformed the way I think many Americans thought about the Japanese car market, this Datsun 240Z coming over, or being built in America effectively, but prepared in America and dominating racing as it did. They suddenly thought, wow, we should take this a lot seriously. So, yeah, very good. Those two watches they're on pre-order now. And of course, there's an additional discount if you use the code word Peter, P-E-T-R as well. Anyway, big thanks, of course, to REC Watches, to Jetcraft, to Track Ninja, and to OEM Exclusive for their support. And you, the viewer, for watching. See you tomorrow. Well, as you probably gathered after the video I did yesterday after qualifying, that I thought this race was going to be a complete bore and a walkover for Oscar Piastri. Just shows, doesn't it? Absolutely no idea. Well, I think in mitigation, can anybody have imagined that when a free gift like a safety car comes out on lap 7 of a race in which there's a limit on the number of laps you can do on each set of tyres anyway, that limit being 25, could anybody not have taken that free gift and thought it'd be better to stay out? I just never imagined that would happen. And yet that is exactly what happened with the two McLarens. As a result, if you want to understand how Max Verstappen won this Qatar Grand Prix, putting aside his natural brilliance and the great job done by Red Bull-Honda anyway, but if you want to understand the strategy of how he won, it was basically that he then ran a one-stop strategy from whenever the safety car came in lap 10, a one-stop strategy, medium and then hard, whereas McLaren, the team with the best car, locked themselves into a two-stop strategy. They had to go medium, medium, hard, and that's how Max Verstappen won that Grand Prix. Of course, it was multiplied by a number of factors, i.e. that when Oscar Piastri and Lando Norris came in, Melbourne, they came out in traffic. Whereas Max came in from his first stop, he basically had a free track. And towards the end of the race, when he was supposed to be taking a second a lap out of Max Verstappen on the hard tyres and on a free lap was doing half a second, he then got stuck behind Lance Stroll's Aston Martin, which happened to be on soft tyres, about 4/10 off the potential time for Oscar Piastri. So that effectively put an end to his challenge. Meanwhile, Lando Norris was stuck behind Kimi Antonelli's Mercedes for umpteen laps. Eventually, on the penultimate lap, Kimi ran wide and Lando moved past, actually moving up one position, which may or may not be important going into the Abu Dhabi finale now. But all of that was too late and none of it mattered. So what is the thinking behind McLaren keeping, first of all, Oscar Piastri out? Because Lando Norris made a very good point that he was in the box seat, the prime position, because he was behind Oscar. And if it was 50-50 and Oscar's going to stay out, why not bring Lando in, at least cover all bases? And from Lando's point of view, that would have been a better thing anyway, because it would have given him a new set of tyres and a different strategy from Oscar's. But McLaren didn't do that. And when challenged by that afterwards on the radio by Lando, the reply from Will Joseph was, well, that gives us now flexibility. All the other runners who came in now have lost their flexibility for later in the race. I don't really understand that, because if a safety car had come out towards the end, effectively everybody would have come in anyway. So what was the flexibility that was gained by McLaren in doing that? I think it was just freezing in the headlights. And it was quite telling, I thought, that when the safety car initially came out on lap 7, and this was as a result of Pierre Gasly and Nico Hülkenberg, had started on softs and was kind of scything his way through, trying to pass Pierre on the outside, and Pierre running a bit wide, and then they both went off. Anyway, debris, safety car. Oscar said, as he was coming around to complete that lap, so what are we doing? Are we boxing? Are we staying out? And there was quite a pause. There was quite a delay. And just as Oscar was coming into the last corner, in other words, the last possible moment, they said, no, we're staying out, Oscar. And he stayed quiet after that. As I say, at this moment, given that McLaren were obviously looking at both options, the logical thing would have been to bring Lando in. And that, of course, comes under the heading of trying to run two number one drivers, both of whom are championship contenders, trying to keep the peace, trying to keep them all mates, and trying, therefore, not to split the strategies in any way that might result in any recriminations after the race. That's what that was all about. That would never happen in a team in which one driver dominates, i.e. Max Verstappen, Yuki Tsunoda. And there was another example of this on lap 43, when Oscar Piastri, leading the race, came in for his set of hard tyres. Remember, each set was limited to 25 laps at this unique Grand Prix in that respect. Oscar came in from the lead and went out on a free track. And now in front of the race was Lando Norris, and right behind him was Max Verstappen, who was trying to run as close as he could without damaging the left front, and therefore prolong the life of the hard tyre for as long as he possibly could. Did a really good job with that. But the logical thing then, if you wanted to maximise the chance of Oscar Piastri winning this Grand Prix, was to keep Lando then out for as long as possible, holding up Max, whilst Oscar, on a free track, blitzed it with purples, and in theory might have even caught Max towards the end of the race. But they didn't do that. 2 laps later, because Oscar had stopped, I think even to the surprise of Red Bull, they brought Lando in. And that was effectively the end of it. That left Max in the lead of the race on a set of hard tyres that he'd beautifully managed into the stint, running 2 or 3 seconds a lap slower than the potential, just over the 3 or 4 critical laps while the heat cycle built up, and then gradually was reducing the tyre management around the lap by lap almost, and he's getting quicker and quicker now as the race went on. Perfect tyre management by Max Verstappen, steered by GP on the pit wall as ever. Really, really good job of that. And then with Max leading the race, suddenly there was sort of 15 laps to go, and Oscar was 14 seconds behind, had to catch him a second a lap. He was in traffic, he couldn't do it, and so it went away. And the desperation set in. This was a transmission to Lando at around this stage of the race when he said, when Will said, I think here he's referring to something that happened at turn 7. It wasn't really clear on the radio. Anyway, he said, you've gone back to what you were doing before, Lando. And Lando in desperation said, I'm trying, I just can't do it. I need more help here, you know. I mean, what is that? This is for a guy leading the World Championship in a very, very good race car, and he's in that state. To me, it's still staggering that McLaren got themselves into that situation, that Lando got himself into that situation. And just looking back now at that decision to bring him in shortly after Oscar, of course, the thinking was, from McLaren's point of view, Lando's still our best championship chance. We can't ruin his race now by keeping him out there. We got to bring him in. But of course, the other perspective is, Oscar Piastri had been quicker all weekend. He won the sprint race. He'd been on the pole. He had a very, very good chance of winning this Grand Prix. In many ways, McLaren then had to maximise their chance of doing that. But they didn't do that either because they had to worry about Lando. And that's, again, it's the whole two-driver thing. Daniel Ricciardo alongside Lando Norris. I mean, that would have been nirvana. So it went away. And he won that race, just to repeat the point, because he effectively ran a one-stop strategy to the two stoppers of the two McLarens. Yeah, it wasn't really, because obviously Max came in on lap 7. But as I said, that's a safety car pit stop. That is a free pit stop. So it was all starting from zero when the safety car went in, lap 10. And all of a sudden, on the contrary to what McLaren was saying, the others had lost their flexibility. Indeed, I think Max had more flexibility at that point because he's on a new set of tyres. Anyway, that was the way this Grand Prix won. I don't think anybody could have predicted that had a safety car come in early on like that the two McLarens would stay out. I mean, I still can't believe they did that. I still can't understand any of the logic behind doing that when it's a free gift. Virtual safety car, completely different situation. But a safety car? Of course, once the safety car went in, both McLarens disappeared into the distance, but let them do it. Max knew that as soon as they stopped, and you knew exactly when they were going to have to stop, and they stopped right on the button, Max was going to take the lead. And from then on, he was basically in control of the race. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. Beautiful drive by Max Verstappen. As I say, all about time management, all about being aggressive at the right moment. Made a very good start. Don't forget, Lando was P2, was on the dirty side of the grid. Max was on the clean side, got a good start. He was alongside Lando going into turn 1, and just sort of with body language, let Lando know, don't even think about trying to keep the inside line. I'm going to take the racing line, and Bob's your uncle. And he was away in front of Lando Norris. Lando lost P2 right at the first corner. Oscar Piastri looked good. I felt sorry for him in many ways, because had McLaren made the right call, which was obviously, and they say, oh, well, in hindsight now it's easy to say, but it wasn't hindsight. I think everybody, probably all the spectators at the Lusail circuit, were saying, why aren't the McLarens coming in like everybody else? It wasn't a hindsight thing, it was a reality thing. Anyway, had they done the correct thing, that's probably the best way of phrasing it, and brought Oscar and Lando in for new tyres, for a new set of mediums, then I think it would have been a McLaren 1-2. It would have been difficult for Max. He might have got Lando, who knows, but he certainly wouldn't have got Oscar. As I was saying yesterday, that's how I thought the race would pan out. So complete and utter shock in many ways that McLaren could botch this up so badly. And I still think it's a function of running two equally quick drivers. As I've been saying for I don't know how long now, had they kept Daniel Ricciardo alongside Lando Norris, I think Lando would have won the World Championship by now. And that's not to say that Oscar's taken points from Lando. It's the way they run the team. It's the calls they make. And we had two shining examples of that tonight in Qatar. And you got Max Verstappen making them look as if they are just beginners, really. And Red Bull, obviously got to throw Red Bull in there. Great job by them. Absolutely crystal clear in all their decision-making. Very decisive in everything they did. Very decisive in the way they controlled Max's time management. Slight difference in handling from one side, from left-handers to right-handers, things like that. But fairly typical, but they sorted out very, very quickly. And they got rid of the bouncing, obviously, after the sprint race as well, without damaging too much the downforce of the car. So just an outstanding job. If you think of where Red Bull were at the end of the sprint race, or even after the sprint qualifying, and how unsettled Max was with the feel of the car, to where they were in the last half of the Qatar Grand Prix on the Sunday night. Just incredible turnaround by the team. And Max obviously totally up for it in every respect. So, yeah, just an amazing win. And into third place, Carlos Sainz, absolutely brilliant for Williams-Mercedes, helped by the traffic jam in the pit lane, obviously, when the safety car came out and everybody except McLaren came in. And in the case of Mercedes, there was a stacking process there between Kimi Antonelli, whose stop was a little bit slow, and then George Russell, and everybody lost positions there, obviously Ferraris, but that were no Lewis stacked up behind Leclerc. That was no problem for Carlos, and he came out and inherited places as a result of that and held the position all the way to the end. Absolutely superb drive, making you wonder yet again why he was sacked by Ferrari, although from Carlos's point of view, he's probably thinking, I'm so glad I'm driving this car and not that heap of whatever, expletive deletive of Ferrari. Charles Leclerc, for the record, finished 8th in this Grand Prix. Absolutely amazing that he even scored points in it, I think. Remember yesterday he had to use all his soft tyres to get out of Q2, had a massive lose in Q3, started 10th, and the car was just undrivable as far as we could see from the onboards from Charles. Just ridiculous. And whereas George Russell, he got boxed in at the start behind and ended up behind Fernando Alonso, eventually got Fernando. Charles was unable to get Fernando in the Aston Martins. And with Lewis starting on softs and finishing only 12th, it just shows yet again the job Charles Leclerc did in that Ferrari. Outstanding work for him. Felt sorry for Isaac Hadjar, who got a puncture right at the end. He'd driven brilliantly as well, I thought, in the Racing Bulls. Unlucky day for him. No virtual safety car, nothing at the end. Bit of debris on track, sparks flying out of the back of the Racing Bulls. But Isaac, really just a bad luck story for him right at the end. The only real tyre drama we saw all day in a race where obviously Pirelli were going in feeling a little bit nervous, which is why they had that 25 lap limit on all sets of tyres throughout the weekend. And the other hard luck story, of course, was Nico Hülkenberg, who started on the softs, was going very well, as I said earlier, and was doing a nice outside pass of Pierre Gasly at turn 1, and then Pierre just ran wide, probably went a little bit too quickly, and the two touched, and Nico thereafter was out, although Pierre kept going. 9th, Liam Lawson. 10, Yuki Tsunoda. Well, we shouldn't forget Yuki out-qualified him for the sprint qualifying. Alex Albon, 11th in the other Williams, and Lewis Hamilton got up to 12th from wherever he was, 15th. He started him on softs. He made a bit of progress early on and finished 12th, but not a great day again, obviously, for Lewis Hamilton. But this will be the day remembered, jointly, obviously, for the quality of Max's drive and the management of Red Bull, the consistency, the stability under pressure, the ability to run the car absolutely perfectly, even though it wasn't a perfect car. And the incredible mistake made by McLaren-Mercedes to allow Red Bull then to go ahead and win that Grand Prix and take the World Championship with lots of momentum to Abu Dhabi. I suppose fans, the community of Formula One worldwide will be saying, yeah, bring it on, bring it on. But if you're McLaren right now, you must have a feeling, if you're Lando Norris particularly, because he could actually have won the championship today if things had gone in his favour. But he didn't, obviously. And not only do things not go in favour of McLaren, but they actually made it worse by making one of the most ridiculous strategy calls ever, really, given under pressure. There's no doubt about that. Big thanks to RSC watchers for their support of this channel. Likewise, big thanks to Jetcraft, to Track Ninja, and to OEM Exclusive. To you, the viewer, for watching. As I say, we'll be back with a live stream this week. See you then.